The mountain was always there, green, silent, generous. The Pompeians saw it every day and never felt fear, because for them, Vesuvius wasn't a volcano. It was just a mountain with the finest wine of the Roman Empire growing on its slopes. That trust cost them everything, and it left us with the greatest archive of human life that history has ever known. The sun rose slowly over the Bay of Naples, painting the sky in orange and pink. In Pompeii, the city was already breathing before the dawn was fully complete. The first sounds were sandals on volcanic stone pavement, the creaking of cartwheels, and the murmur of voices filling the narrow streets with the smell of warm bread and open fire. The bakeries, known as pistrina, were the first to come alive. Before the rooster crowed a second time, the bakers were already feeding the ovens with dry wood. The smoke rose thick and dense toward the blue sky. The smell of baking bread spread across entire city blocks, mingling with the scent of ash and the cool freshness of the sea at dawn. Domestic slaves woke before everyone else. They were the ones who lit the oil lamps, swept the atriums, and filled the amphoras with fresh water carried from the public fountains. In many houses, the day began with the muffled sound of bare feet on cold mosaics, bodies bent over silent tasks, while the masters still slept under linen sheets. The paterfamilias, the head of the Roman household, woke at the break of day. He performed a brief domestic ritual before the lararium, the small family altar set into the wall of the kitchen or atrium. There, among painted clay figurines and dried herb branches, he offered a little flour, honey, or wine to the lares, the protective spirits of the home. It was a daily act, as natural as breathing. The children were woken by trusted slave women. They washed the little ones' faces with cold water, combed their hair with perfumed oils, and dressed them in simple tunics. Boys from wealthy families prepared to accompany their fathers on their mourning obligations. Girls, in general, remained in the care of the matrons and the most experienced slave women. In the humbler homes, there was no elaborate lararium and no dedicated slave. The mother woke herself, lit the terracotta brazier, warmed the leftovers from the day before, and called the children with a firm and tired voice. Breakfast was simple: hard bread soaked in olive oil, olives, perhaps a piece of salted cheese. The table was the stone counter itself, or the packed dirt floor. The streets of Pompeii in the morning were a spectacle. The raised sidewalks protected pedestrians from the mud and debris that ran through the central channels. The stepping stones, large spaced blocks, allowed people to cross the street without dirtying their feet. Between them rolled the wheels of carts loaded with barrels, sacks of wheat, amphoras of wine, and olive oil coming from the fertile surroundings of Vesuvius. The mountain was always there, majestic, green, silent. The Pompeians saw it every day, upon waking, while walking the streets, while working in the fields. For them, Vesuvius was just a mountain, a generous mountain in fact. Its slopes produced the best wine in the region, the Vesuvinum, famous throughout the Roman Empire for its intense flavor and its nearly black color. The vines covered the volcano's slopes like a dark green mantle. The peasants who lived and worked there knew every stone of that terrain. The soil was dark, rich in minerals, unlike any other in Campania. They did not know, no one knew, that this extraordinary fertility was the silent gift of eruptions forgotten centuries before. The Forum of Pompeii was the pulsing heart of the city. Already in the early morning, citizens converged on that open space surrounded by white limestone columns. There stood the tribunal, the temple of Jupiter, the food market, the magistrates' offices. It was the place where deals were closed, where gossip spread, where the public life of the city unfolded out loud. Merchants opened their shops still in the faint light of dawn. The doors were panels of heavy wood that slotted into grooves in the floor. No hinges, no modern locks. Opening the shop was a ritual of strength and routine. With the doors open, the goods overflowed onto the sidewalk. Stacked ceramics, folded fabrics, spices in open baskets exhaling aromas that covered the smell of the streets. The Thermopolia were the popular restaurants of Pompeii. Their masonry counters held large circular containers set into the stone, the dolia, where hot stews, cooked vegetables, and fermented fish sauce known as garum were kept. Most workers and apartment dwellers had no kitchen of their own. They ate there, standing up, with a clay bowl in hand, between one task and the next. Garum was omnipresent in Pompeii. This dark, salty, pungent sauce made from the fermentation of fish innards with sea salt was the universal seasoning of Roman cooking. There were entire factories in the city dedicated to producing it. The smell was strong enough to bother the neighbors, but no one complained. It was the smell of profit, of commerce, of everyday life. The fullers, laundry workers, began early. The Felonii of Pompeii were noisy and foul-smelling establishments. The dirty fabrics were submerged in tanks of human urine collected from vessels placed throughout the streets. The ammonia in the urine dissolved the grease from the fabrics. The workers trod the cloth inside the tanks for hours, singing to mark the rhythm, their feet purple from the constant effort. Women from wealthy families woke to a lengthy beauty ritual. Specialized slaves, the ornatrices, combed the matrona's elaborate hair, fixing braids, curls, and arrangements with bone and bronze pins. The face was prepared with lead powder to lighten the skin, dark coal on the eyelids, red ochre on the lips and cheeks. Beauty was slow and precise work. Yeah, the boys of Pompeii went to school with the stomacher, a leather bag, hanging from their shoulder. Inside, wax tablets for writing with a metal stylus. The schools often operated under the forum arcades or in rooms rented beside the shops. The teacher, usually a Greek freedman, taught reading, writing, and arithmetic in a loud voice with a cane ready for the distracted. The walls of Pompeii were a living newspaper. Painted red or white, they displayed electoral announcements, gladiator advertisements, rental notices, insults, and declarations of love. Professional scribes painted commissioned messages in well-formed black letters. Anonymous messages appeared scratched at night, with nails or charcoal, revealing the intimate and irreverent side of the city. The gladiators trained in the amphitheater and in the large palestra beside it. They were celebrated figures in Pompeii. Their faces were painted on walls, their names written in passionate graffiti. Some were slaves, others convicted criminals, but there were also free men who chose that life for glory or for money. The women of Pompeii had a declared fascination for them, and the graffiti left no doubt about it. Pompeii's amphitheater was one of the oldest in the Roman world. It held up to 20,000 people, more than the city's own population. On game days, there were visitors from neighboring cities. Tickets were distributed by wealthy patrons who bought political loyalty with blood and spectacle. The audience was divided by social class. The rich seated in the lower stone tiers, the poor crammed up at the top under the sun. The baths were the second home of the Pompeians. There were at least 3 public bath complexes in the city, in addition to smaller baths in private establishments. Men and women bathed at separate hours or in separate wings. The bathing ritual followed strict steps. First, the apoditerium, where they undressed. Then the tepidarium, warm. Next, the caldarium, hot and humid. And finally, the frigidarium, cold and invigorating. In the baths, the body was rubbed with olive oil and then scraped with a curved metal instrument called a strigil. Soap did not exist. It was the oil that cleaned away the dirt. After scraping, the skin was smooth and perfumed. In the restrooms, men played dice, discussed politics, closed deals. The baths were a social club, a marketplace of influence, a stage for conversations that moved the city. Pompeii's market, the Macellum, stood to the north of the Forum. There, stone counters displayed fresh fish from the sea, meats hung on hooks, fruits and vegetables brought from the surrounding farms. The floor was constantly wet with water, and the fluids of butchering poured by the vendors. The noise was immense. Shouted prices, heated negotiations, children running between adults' legs, dogs sniffing scraps on the ground. The farmers from the rural estates around Vesuvius arrived at the market before dawn, with carts pulled by mules or oxen. They brought grapes, olives, fava beans, onions, dried figs, olive oil in wax-sealed amphoras. Many did not speak fluent Latin. They were Oscans, Samnites, descendants of the peoples who had inhabited that land before Rome. But the market had its own language, the price, the weight, the gesture. The doctors of Pompeii had open consulting rooms on the main streets. Without the modern concept of infection, they treated wounds with honey and wine, relieved pain with poppy and mandrake extracts, performed amputations with sharp bronze instruments. The surgical instruments found in the ruins reveal a medicine surprisingly sophisticated for the era. Forceps, scalpels, probes, specula. The day advanced, and the heat of southern Italy settled over the city. Around midday, the streets emptied. The volcanic stone sidewalk reflected the heat like a frying pan. Merchants closed their shops. Workers sought shade. Families retreated home for the prendium, the midday meal, followed by a long nap in the coolest room of the house. The wealthy houses of Pompeii were built for the heat. The impluvium, the square opening in the atrium ceiling, created an air current that circulated through the rooms. The inner garden, the peristyle, with its bubbling fountain and perfumed plants, kept the temperature several degrees below the rest of the city. There, families rested, children played, trusted slaves performed light tasks in the pleasant shade. The paintings on the walls of Pompeian homes were windows into imagined worlds, seascapes, hunting scenes, lush gardens with colorful birds, all painted with a wet fresco technique that fixed the colors with the hardness of stone. Many modest homes also had painted walls, though simpler ones. Color was a sign of life, of wealth, of belonging to a civilization that loved beauty. The floor mosaics told stories. At house entrances, the image of a fierce dog with the inscription Cave Canem, beware of the dog, warned visitors. In the dining rooms, scenes of mythological banquets. In the bathrooms, geometric figures. Each mosaic was assembled stone by stone, tessera by tessera, by craftsmen who dedicated weeks or months to a single composition of just a few square meters. The blacksmiths worked all day in small forges open to the street. The rhythmic sound of the hammer on the anvil was part of the music of the city. They made nails, hinges, agricultural tools, knives, chains. The forge fire never went out completely. It was kept alive with charcoal and the constant blow of leather bellows. The heat coming out of the open doorway made passing through those streets suffocating in summer. Women who had no slaves wove at home. The vertical loom stood in the main room, and the rhythmic sound of the shuttle was as constant as breathing. They wove wool dyed with indigo, saffron, or murex, a mollusk whose extract produced the famous imperial purple. Clothing was a precise social indicator. The quality of the fabric, the richness of the colors, The finish of the borders told exactly who was who in that society without disguises. The slaves of Pompeii were of all origins. There were cultured Greeks who served as tutors and secretaries, Egyptians who worked in the temples of Isis, Germanic and Gallic people who carried loads and did physical labor, Africans who played music at banquets. Many spoke several languages. Some had a peculium, a small savings permitted by the owner, with which they might one day buy their own freedom. The Temple of Isis was one of the most visited in Pompeii. The Egyptian goddess had conquered the hearts of the Romans, promising life after death and protection in moments of crisis. The priests shaved their heads, wore white linen, and performed rituals with sacred water from the Nile, or at least what they claimed was water from the Nile. Religion in Pompeii was plural, loud, and absolutely pragmatic. The Pompeians prayed to whoever was capable of helping. In the afternoon, the men returned to their obligations. The politicians, the duoviri, the aediles, received clients in the forum, heard petitions, resolved boundary disputes between properties, inspected the merchants' weights and measures. A local political life was intense and competitive. Municipal election candidates funded public works, sponsored gladiatorial spectacles, and distributed food to buy votes, a practice so common that no one found it strange. The children of Pompeii played in the streets and courtyards with clay dolls, wooden tops, and leather knots to toss. The older boys played a primitive version of marbles with walnut seeds. The girls imitated their mothers, wrapping dolls in cloth as if they were real babies. The river and the public fountains were forbidden territories, but constantly invaded, with the tired complicity of the slave women tasked with watching over them. The fishermen set out before dawn from Pompeii's small port, rowing down the Sarno River in flat wooden boats. They returned at daybreak with nets full of croakers, sea bream, eels, and octopus. The fresh fish sold quickly at the market. In the heat of Campania, nothing lasted. What remained was salted, smoked, or turned into garum. Not a single sea creature was wasted in that precise economy, with no margin for error. Vesuvius appeared in the paintings of Pompeii's houses. In one famous fresco, it is depicted as a single tall mountain covered in vines, with Dionysus, god of wine, at its side, and a serpent, protective symbol, coiled at its base. It was an image of abundance and safety. The mountain was not a threat, it was a patron. No one in Pompeii could have imagined that painting would be one of the last portraits of the volcano before it showed its true face. The wine shops opened in the afternoon. They were small, dark spaces with stone benches and amphoras buried in the floor to keep the wine cool. The clients were workers, craftsmen, sailors, freedmen who drank the local wine cut with water. Drinking pure wine was considered the habit of barbarians. The walls of the wine shops were covered in graffiti, names, insults, betting results, declarations of love that had no other place to exist. Dusk in Pompeii was golden and slow. The shadows of the columns lengthened across the pavement. The vendors began to close their stalls. The slaves returned from the fountains with the last water jars of the day. The forum emptied gradually. The pigeons returned to the rooftops. The smell of the city changed, the heat of the day giving way to a breeze that carried salt from the sea and resin from the pine trees on Vesuvius's slopes. Dinner was the main meal of the Roman day. In wealthy homes, it began around the 9th hour, the equivalent of our late afternoon, and could last for hours. The guests reclined on couches around a low table, the triclinium, leaning on their left elbow, eating with the right hand. Slaves circulated constantly, bringing dishes, are collecting bones, filling cups with wine mixed with honey and spices. The menu at Pompeian banquets was a demonstration of power. It began with the gustaccio, appetizers of eggs, olives, shellfish, and mushrooms. Then came the prima mensae, main courses of roasted meats, whole fish, bird stuffed with fruit. It ended with the secundae mensae, fruit, honey, and nut sweets, cured cheeses. Eating much was a sign of prosperity. Wasting was a luxury the rich cultivated with deliberate pleasure. In the humble homes, dinner was whatever remained: bread, cooked vegetables, perhaps a little salted fish. The family sat on small stools around a low wooden table or ate directly from the clay pot. The children ate first. The wine was diluted by half, not out of sophistication, but because pure wine was more expensive and lasted longer. Diluted. The domestic economy of the poor was an exact and implacable science. At night, Pompeii did not sleep completely. The wine shops and the lupanaria remained open in the darkest alleyways. Young men from wealthy families went out to drink, gamble, and seek adventure after their parents were asleep. The streets were dangerous without lighting. The window lamps barely reached the middle of the sidewalk. Those with money went out accompanied by slaves carrying torches. Those without went out quickly and prayed not to encounter anyone. The dreams of the Pompeians were inhabited by gods. A Jupiter and Juno presided over the top of Olympus and the Forum. Venus was the city's special patron. Her temple dominated one of the main entrances. Mercury protected the merchants. Vulcan, god of fire and forges, had his cult, though a lesser one. No one associated Vulcan with Vesuvius. The volcano was not a volcano to them. It was just a green mountain with a simple name, Mons Vesuvius. Earthquakes were common in the region. In 62 AD, 17 years before the fatal eruption, a great earthquake had shaken Pompeii and destroyed a significant part of the city. Many buildings were still being rebuilt in August of 79. The Pompeians had learned to live with the tremors. They rebuilt, reinforced the walls, repainted the damaged frescoes. The earth shook, and they stayed. That was their home. The signs of instability were frequent during that summer of 79 AD. The fountains would dry up and return. The animals behaved strangely. Small tremors occurred almost every day. Yet people complained, adjusted routines, consulted fortune tellers, but no one left. The city was prosperous. The wine harvest promised to be good. Business was in order. The Pompeians had every reason to stay, and no experience to understand what was coming. The children of Pompeii grew up with the view of Vesuvius as a permanent backdrop. They climbed its slopes to pick wild fruit, to shepherd sheep, to play among the vines. They knew every trail, every stone, and every spring that bubbled hot from the soil, which the adults attributed to the summer heat, not to the fire burning in the depths. The mountain was too familiar to be feared. That was the problem. The scribes and poets of Pompeii wrote about love, about politics, about gladiators. None wrote about the volcano as a danger. Virgil, born nearby, had described the region as the Garden of Italy. To Pliny the Elder, who would die on that August day trying to rescue survivors, had studied natural phenomena his whole life and still did not fully understand what a volcano was. Human knowledge had its limits, and that limit had the shape of a green and generous mountain. The last complete dawn that Pompeii ever knew was probably an ordinary summer morning. The sun rose over the bay, the bakeries lit their ovens, the slaves swept the atriums, the merchants opened their shops. The mules pulled carts over the volcanic stone pavement. without knowing that that stone had been forged in the same fire that was about to reshape the world. It was just another morning, and it was the last. On the morning of August 24th, 79 A.D., Vesuvius woke. First came the tremors, stronger than usual. Then a column of black smoke that rose into the sky like an immense pine tree. The image used by Pliny the Younger himself, who witnessed it from the opposite shore of the bay. Pumice stones began to fall like rain. People grabbed cushions over their heads and ran into the streets. They still believed they could escape. The rain of pumice stones lasted for hours. The rooftops gave way under the weight. Those who stayed inside were buried by the falling structures. Those who went out into the streets faced a gray avalanche that rose to their ankles, to their knees, to their chests. Some managed to flee toward the sea. Others were lost in the thick darkness that covered the day like a night of coal. The screams mixed with the continuous roar of the volcano that had never had a true name until that moment. The final hours were of pyroclastic surges, burning clouds of gas, ash, and rock fragments that descended the slopes at hundreds of kilometers per hour. Those still alive in Pompeii did not survive contact with that heat of over 300 degrees. The deaths were instantaneous. The bodies remained where they were, at home, in the street, at the baths, at the port, preserved forever under meters of ash and stone, an entire city frozen in time in a single day. When archaeologists began to excavate Pompeii centuries later, they found not merely ruins, but suspended life. Carbonized bread still inside the ovens, eggs in baskets, bowls of food, a dog with puppies trying to protect them, two lovers embracing, a man with his hand over his face, shielding his eyes from a smoke that would never go away. Pompeii did not die. It was paused, and in that pause, it tells us everything about who we were. Vesuvius remains active. It still dominates the landscape of the Bay of Naples today, green and impassive, just as it was in 79 A.D. 3 million people live on its slopes. Vines grow in the same dark and fertile soil the Pompeians cultivated. Tourists climb to the crater and look down into the smoking silence of the depths, and return to their cars without feeling fear. Just like the Pompeians, just as it has always been, just as it perhaps always will be. Pompeii gave us a gift that no civilization should ever have to make. The proof that it existed, not in words written by distant historians, but in shoes left on a threshold, in coins forgotten in a pouch, in a half-full wine cup on a stone table. A city that woke up like every other city, carried out its routine with the seriousness and lightness of those who do not know it is the last time, and then disappeared, leaving behind everything